that has recently been reported at 90 billion barrels of oil above the Arctic Circle. There is oil in the Alberta oil sands, approximately 1.7 trillion, that's terrible, terrific, barrels of oil. Maybe it's only 20 to 60% recoverable, but you have to have a price of $20 to $40 a barrel for oil before it's feasible to do that. Then there's the Bakken Oil Share, B-A-K-K-E-N. Oil share deposit in Wyoming, North Dakota, and Canada. And of course the government says, well, it contains 4 billion barrels of oil. The governor of Montana, and we have all the articles if we want to read them, the governor of Montana says it contains 40 billion barrels of oil. Dr. Price, P-R-I-C-E, who worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, prepared a report, and he'd spent 20 or more years studying the Bakken Reserve. He said that there was somewhere between 271 and 503 billion barrels of oil there, 50% recoverable. Of course, strangely, Dr. Price died before his report ever could be released, and of course was never released by the Geological Survey because I guess, well, other people never concerned about their health. Recently, they described a 33 billion barrel oil field off the coast of Brazil. And then, of course, we have the Colorado oil shale. Now, this is separate from the Bakken oil shale. And the American Free Press International reports it's believed that the shale deposit in the Green River region of Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming is holding the equivalent of between 1.5 and 1.8 trillion barrels of oil, called oil shale or shale oil, much of it cannot be recovered with current technology, but if half of it can be recovered, of course, we would have 3 times the oil reserves of Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia has 264 billion barrels of oil. That's what everybody says, 264. So you can see the difference between 264 billion and 1.5 to 1.8 trillion. Here again, you have to have an oil price that is $20 to $30 a barrel before it's feasible to get it out of the ground. And then, of course, there's the Indonesian offshore oil I described earlier, which is estimated at between 107 and 320 billion barrels of oil. And then, of course, the Interior Department has estimated that our offshore oil here in the United States is 85 billion barrels of oil. But there are other people who say the Ventura Basin, just down south of the of where we are, holds by itself, without all the other offshore oil, 281 billion barrels of oil. And you can track all these articles down, and we have them all here for you in our syllabus. And then, of course, there's the oil up at Prudhoe Bay. And, of course, that originally was supposed to have been about 24 billion barrels. They say about 14 billion barrels has been extracted, but it's still putting out 1 million barrels a day. But then Lindsay Williams, in his book, described something called the Coperic oil field, which was just northwest of Prudhoe Bay. And of course, this is the information he got from Mr. X. And it's all included here, and the chapters from his book, which we pulled out off the internet, are there. And of course, was twice the size of Gull Island, of the Prudhoe Bay, and Gull Island was 4 times the size of Prudhoe Bay. In fact, some people estimated at far more oil than all of Saudi Arabia, simply in the Gull Island oil field. And then, of course, we have this report put out by this agency for the Department of Energy pointing out that there are over 1 trillion barrels of recoverable oil in the United States today. But they can't let the American people know that. Is that why, of course, Lindsay Williams got his telephone call in late May of this year? So basically, of course, what has happened, what we've seen is, of course, the rise in the price of oil began to shake the very foundation of our economy. But why then did they lower the price of oil? Well, first of all, I believe that they raised the price of oil because they are working on a timetable. And for whatever reason, they wanted this economic crisis to come on at this time because the people we're working with are not dealing with normal human intelligence. But they are energized by other forces which most people have no idea even exist. Now, I believe they dropped the price of oil very simply because you could begin to develop the oil sands and the oil shale, massive deposits here, if the price of oil was high enough, and they don't want competition. And of course, I believe this is one of the major motivations for what they're doing. And then, of course, as we begin getting into how this is all taking place, and people really don't understand that down through the ages, we've always had people who were rulers. And in the ancient times, we had chiefs, and we had dictators, and emperors, and pharaohs, and warlords, and kings. But always behind the ruler, there was a powerful spiritual force. The pharaohs had priests. You remember the stories in the Bible about how Moses would challenge the pharaoh's priest, and Moses would throw down his staff, and the priest would throw down their staff. Moses' staff would turn into a serpent, and the priest would throw down their staff and turn into a serpent. How could those things happen? I mean, is that just all myth, or is there any truth to it? Certainly the tribal chiefs always had a witch doctor with them. And the witch doctors, in many instances, did have supernatural power. They were able to do amazing things. And as you hear our program this afternoon with Johanna Michelson, who witnessed some of the truly supernatural events that had occurred when she was being trained to become a spiritual healer in Mexico, I think you'll really begin to understand that there is another dimension which most rational people in America have no idea exists. So then you get in the background of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was controlled by astrologers. He was deeply involved in the occult. He regularly read a book called The Secret Doctrine, which was written by a woman named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And it's said that in the National Archives is the copy of the book she wrote called The Secret Doctrine, with Hitler's annotations in the margin of that. Certainly the kings and emperors always had priests and wise men to advise them. And they always looked to the spiritual forces, and those spiritual forces, of course, verified the king, and the king, of course, supported the people who were able to harness the spiritual forces. Well, what about today? What about in America today? Who really runs our country? Do you really think that there's a dime's worth of difference between John McCain and Obama? John McCain is the most liberal Republican senator in the United States Senate, and Obama is the most liberal Democratic senator in the Republic. Neither one of them talks about globalism. Neither one of them talks about securing our borders or stopping illegal immigration, or talks about the Federal Reserve System and why we've really got into this current economic mess. They're all avoiding the real subjects. We are ruled by what I call the Brotherhood of Darkness. If you haven't read the book, I hope you'll get it and read it through. And this is really beyond the time we have today. But we hope that you'll read the book and begin to understand that there are not one, but a number of organizations. But even when you begin to get into the background of, say, the Council on Foreign Relations, or the Trilateral Commission, and Patrick Wood, who's going to be our speaker this afternoon, is certainly one. I think he is probably the current leading expert on the Trilateral Commission that we have in our country. But you look at what their logo is, and you look very carefully, you see it's 3 6s interlocked. The most recent logo is, if you look very carefully, you see the 3 6s joined together by an upside-down broken cross. Is that just an accident? And I don't think so for 1 minute. I think these people know exactly what they are doing. And then, of course, if you trace the history of mankind, going all the way back to Nimrod, remember Nimrod, of course, wanted to create a perfect society without God, and he was the great hunter. He actually started to construct this Temple of Babel, and of course he never got it completed because God intervened and caused everybody to speak a different language. And of course you can go to Strasbourg today, and there in Strasbourg you will actually see a replica of the unfinished Tower of Babel. It is where the European Union meets on a regular basis. And the leaders of the European Union are hoping to fulfill Nimrod's ancient plan. What is the major driving force behind the European Union? People here in the United States, the American State Department, our government is pushing all of this effort to unite the world into a one world order, a one world financial system, a one world currency, a one world religion, and of course, the installation of a new one world leader. But most people don't understand that, and yet if you see what's going on today, and you read what the European leaders are talking about today, as they see what's happening in the financial system, what are they talking about? We need a new financial order. We need a new international financial order. And this is what it's really all about. And you can trace these spiritual forces from the time of Nimrod down to the Egyptians, and of course then into the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Medes, and they of course were there about the same time as ancient Greece was, and of course you find that Pythagoras and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and even Alexander the Great, a sequence of leaders, philosophical leaders there in ancient Greece, but they were all involved in the mystery religions. They were all involved in the occult. And of course, if you haven't, of course, heard my talk, going into the background of this, it's called The Secret Knowledge. Let me suggest it. It's available on DVD, and there is a syllabus that you need to get to document what we're talking about. There are occult forces. There have always been occult forces. The Brotherhood of Darkness, which we are dealing with today, that really controls the United States and the governments of the world, has deep roots in the occult. And so in this syllabus, we have actually put 3 documents. The first one is the Earth Summit. The second is a partial summary of the Global Biodiversity Assessment. And if you get that syllabus, I've asked the girls to include here a little pamphlet which I got from a Luciferian organization. It's called The Working of the Spiritual Hierarchy. And of course, the Earth Summit is the Mein Kampf of what's going on today. It was written by Mikhail Gorbachev, who is deeply involved in the occult. You're never going to hear that, but he is deeply involved in the occult. By Maurice Strong, a multi-billionaire who's deeply involved in the occult. By the son of Nelson Rockefeller, because the Rockefeller family has been involved with the occult, many of these people, for many generations, and the Rockefeller Foundation has funded many of the terrible things that have happened in our society, including Alfred Kinsey, which led to the pornography and immorality that we see today. So these 3 men, Stephen Rockefeller, Mikhail Gorbachev, and of course Maurice Strong, wrote the Earth Charter, and you'll get a copy of it here, and you need to read it. This is the Mein Kampf for the world. They talk about how they're going to redistribute the wealth, not only within nations, but between nations, and this is why, of course, one reason why we're certainly not developing our oil, so that we can buy oil from other countries and send our wealth overseas. We're putting out something like, I think $700 billion a year. You know, the largest part of our national trade deficit is buying oil, when we don't need to buy oil, but they want to redistribute your wealth to other nations and to raise the living standards in China and other countries as we lower living standards in America. And that is going to come about as a result of the coming financial collapse. In the Earth Charter, they talk about this new spirituality. And of course, they talk about this, refer to this idea of world government. You'll want to read and study the Earth Charter. The second document, we've just included a part of it, is called the Global Biodiversity Assessment. You can buy it came out after the Second Earth Summit in 1992, published by Cambridge University Press. And one of our people here was kind enough to summarize this 840-page booklet, and it's in our syllabus. But there they talk about how we're going to have to eliminate much of the world's population, either that or lower the living standards. We're going to have a living 7 billion people. They've got to live, in very low living standards. But if we want to maintain the living standards we have in the United States, the world will only support a billion people. What are they going to do with the rest of them? Well, that, of course, gets you into the population control agenda and some of the other terrible things we'll be talking about. But the third thing we have included, and of course that is this little pamphlet.